season. The first one is May 4th, called Inclusive Excellence and Student Affairs. Please join us to hear Stephanie Helms-Pickett in a conversation with Asa. And our final messy conversation for the spring term will invite Tanji Vey to talk about Ansel Dua activism from the cracks, along with Rosa Garza Marino. And I'd also like to make the announcement that our return to messy conversations in summer quarter, not everybody is on quarters anymore, is July 13th. And so we look forward to seeing you back for the summer season at that time. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today, Mansa Gills. And Mansa and Asa are here to talk about Black speculative fiction and creativity. And we will also hear a tiny little bit about AI. So thanks for being here today. If there's any other announcements, feel free to add them. Otherwise, let's get started.
Great. Thanks, Sarah Beth. Hi, Mansa. Good to see you.
Hey, Asa. Hey,
Welcome.
everybody.
So I'll give it a brief little bio, and then I was hoping we could share the trailer for your graphic novel trilogy that we'll be talking a bit about today. So Mansa Gills is a science fiction writer and graphic novelist from LA, and his passion for storytelling began at a young age, sparked by middle school creative writing class and a Twilight Zone book filled with unsettling twists and unanswered questions. That fascination deepened through an unexpected bond with his father when the two discovered they were both quietly writing, one crafting stories, the other poetry. Mansa's creativity was further shaped in a learning environment founded by his mother, who we're all very familiar with here at Messy Conversations, and where writing, performance, and imagination were not just encouraged but expected. And these early influences, family, curiosity, and speculative wonder, continue to inform his work today. I love that intro captures kind of the influences of the parents, and yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll play the trailer now, unless you have anything to add there.
No, yeah, we can go ahead and
Go from
play the
there.
trailer and then get into it.
Great.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. Right.
Thanks, Asa.
Yeah, that's cool. Let me pull up. Lost my window here. Okay, gotcha. So the first question I had was wondered if you could start by just telling us a little bit about the Divine Masquerade series,
Mhm.
and so like what it's about and what are some of the major themes that you're exploring in the work.
Yeah, no, happily. Divine Masquerade is a series. It's actually very personal because there's a lot of connection between my own relationship with my dad and with technology, and then a lot of that is incorporated in the book itself. But it's essentially about a young man who is a scientist and trying to reconnect with his father who passed away, in doing so using dream technology. And his dad was very well versed in meditation and lucid dreaming. This character, Lloyd Stanton, was not, and so he uses technology to reach his father, I guess, in the afterlife. But in doing so and using that technology, he invites some other entity that he didn't plan on encountering, and so that opens up a whole another world as far as like the intersection of technology and spirituality and what it means to heavily rely on technology over spirituality and what that opens up. So that's the crux of the story. And a lot of that was influenced by, my own relationship with my dad and how, especially how he was such an eloquent writer, and always, encouraged me to pursue my own writing style and things like that. But he wrote so beautifully, and the difference in my writing and his and what I have to use to achieve that versus what he was using. And so like all that is essentially embedded in the story as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was one of the first things that struck me and that we talked about was kind of the parallels between those themes and like the
Mhm.
actual method of writing this, that you're using technologies in a way that your father didn't use to write, and that
Mhm.
there's that parallel with the story in the actual like format of it as well. Um, and in our conversations leading up to this, you mentioned some of your major influences
Mhm.
from other Black sci-fi writers like Octavia Butler,
Mhm.
stressed. And so I'm wondering what attracts you to science fiction and speculative fiction
Mhm.
kind of generally, and then more specifically, how the Black perspective intersects with that and complements sci-fi or
Yeah,
speculative fiction.
it's a long track. So what I love about science fiction is you metaphorically using science fiction and futurism to explain things that are happening now and to speak in a speculative fashion about how you can imagine how a world might be based on things that you recognize now, based on a future that you're thinking about, and how you can represent that in science fiction. So that's always been very intriguing to me to tell like a metaphorical story. Also what's embedded in the story is I'm named after Mansa Musa. And if don't know, he was the wealthiest man in history, but he went on this extravagant pilgrimage that some believe attracted European colonialism and imperialism to Africa because of the spreading of wealth. And so that's also embedded in the story in a way of inviting unintentionally something that can be harmful to your, in this case, to Lloyd's planet, by flaunting something that he, doesn't have a lot of understanding of. So that's kind of like using that as inspiration to kind of tell that story, but from a science fiction point of view. But no, Octavia Butler's been an enormous influence, mainly because I feel like she's been able to, her stories weren't grounded in race specifically. Those were some of the central themes, some more than others. But for the most part, they were future stories using a black female protagonist because she was a black female. So why not use that as the protagonist? Um, and so for me, it was including African Americans in the future just naturally. That wasn't the crux of the story. That wasn't the main theme of the story. It's just what it was. And so that was very influential for me. So a lot of my characters are intentional. That look like me. Obviously, the protagonist is a black male, but a lot of the characters are based on people who I've encountered in my lifetime. Um, and so that representation is important to me because a lot of times we have been left out of future stories or in science fiction, and even to the point where when we are included, or if there are science fiction stories, they're based on the struggle or slavery and we just need more stories than that. We need the freedom to tell other stories. So that's why Octavia Butler was so influential to me in that regard. But then outside of that, it's Philip K. Dick. It's Rod Serling. I mentioned the Twilight Zone in my bio, and how he was very progressive in his storytelling. It's the Matrix movies. That's my favorite science fiction stories. It's, being in seventh grade and seeing Jurassic Park come out and learning like, oh, this was based on the book, and then seeing how incredible that book was and things like that. So all that was influential. And just using the medium of science fiction to tell a grand story and to tell a metaphorical story is probably one of the most influential things about it.
Yeah, that's great. And it kind of leads perfectly into the next question I wanted to ask, which is like the other genre
Hmm.
of fiction that this fits into, which is like graphic fiction or
Hmm.
graphic novels, comics. So, what makes that medium attractive to you, and what kind of advantages do you see in it? And you mentioned to me previously that you were influenced by Watchmen, the great
Hmm.
graphic novel Watchmen. What makes that work stand out to you, and how did it influence you? So there were a lot of questions in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. So to start with just the graphic novel perspective, it for me it was learning early on and really learning with Watchmen and another great graphic novel work called Mouse. Being able to tell thinking that comic books were for like kids and then learning that hey, graphic novels can be used for very sophisticated storytelling. So that was the first influence, but it really started with Watchmen in that regard. And I know there were comic books out there who told serious stories, but a lot of them were superhero based. And even though Watchmen is still superhero based, it's very grounded. But then, I read in grad school, we were introduced to this graphic novel called Fun Home, which was about a coming of age story for a young LGBTQ woman. And that was very interesting. Um, and then also in my grad program, I was working amongst different disciplines. It wasn't just a creative writing program. So I got to work with painters and poets and artists and things like that. So that was more influential than I even realized at the time. And like learning later, I'm like, oh, that's where I got the idea to kind of do these different things and incorporate these different mediums. So and then also in I think it was my third year in college in one of my English courses, we read some special edition of Huckleberry Finn. And in that book, at the beginning and end of each chapter, there was like an illustration of something important that happened in the chapter. And back then, I didn't think it was, you should include images in your books. It was seen as taboo, so it's not something I really thought about. But that was actually something that was very influential to me as well. So when I started writing this, it was originally going to be developed as a novel, and you don't know how many times I started and stopped. And so when AI came on the scene and like the ability to kind of create my own bit images to accompany the story, that's the way I wanted to tell it. And so it was cool to me to kind of render these images and ideas as I saw them in my head and using my prose for these descriptions. And I thought it was just, to be honest, like a really cool way to tell the story because it's very visual. Initially, I was going to do a version where it's going to be a traditional novel, but I was going to have images at the end of chapters, similar to what I was just talking about. But then the graphic novel format just felt right to me, and especially just in the format of just telling a very sophisticated story. So that's what attracted me to using that medium.
Yeah, so I think so. You mentioned something we do plan to get into, like the use of AI
Hmm.
here, and there's all kinds of takes on the use of
Hmm.
AI, whether, we can ethically use it now, the amount of energy consumption, the impact on writers.
Hmm.
And I know that, you've gone into this thinking a lot about those issues. And so yeah, maybe you can go a little bit deeper into that of like where you see the advantages of
Mhm.
using tools, and maybe you could even go into like what tools you
Mhm.
used for this, or explain kind of how it all came together.
Yeah, yeah, and I think so. First and foremost, I want to say that all those concerns are very valid, and I think I'd be remiss to not think about them, to not mention them, even when I'm doing my work. I think there's a balance. I mean, obviously, we know corporations are spending billions of dollars on this stuff, so it's not going anywhere. So that was like one approach that I was taking, like, why not use the tools that are available to me? But also recognizing, particularly in this space, that other mediums, I kind of get it, but when it comes to art and drawing, I totally empathize with the pushback. I really do. Um, with that said, I think there can be a little more tact in response to it. I recently, I, I don't know why I feel the need to defend people, but I recently saw some guy on Facebook posted like a little thing that he was doing for his son, like creating some little superhero story, and he used AI for it. And the comments were just brutal. And I just thought it was so unnecessary. And I came in to defend him, realizing later that he didn't need defense at all. He had a really tough skin, which he let me know in a positive way, and we had a nice exchange. But with that said, like that would be my only recommendation is to not aim your ire at the creator, and instead let's think about how we can address the major corporations and how they're using it, the data centers in poor communities. I'm even looking into more open source tools because it doesn't use the same energy consumption. It's using the consumption of your machine, and so you just have to buy a more powerful computer in order to run that. I am planning on working with traditional artists for special editions of Divine Masquerade and other stories that I'm working on. So it's not going to be completely AI focused. That's just how I started. It allowed me to move quickly and put something out when I had been struggling to do so for the last 8 to 10 years. And so now I'm a published author, but I can't say like I owe it completely to AI, but AI was definitely a catalyst for it. Um, and so I think we have to think about those questions when we're using it. But, we also have to be real. AI isn't the only thing that's destroying the planet. There are plenty of things that we partake in on a regular basis. Even the negativity that are coming from those comments are done on a cell phone. We all know like it's so like we're trapped in the thick of it. But what I will say that is important to keep those issues at the forefront. It's important to think of like how can you contribute less to the things that are damaging our planet, and then try to do it as responsible as possible. That's always my recommendation. And as far as the tools that I'm using, I've been using mainly Midjourney for creating the artwork. Some of it, thankfully, was actually inspired by a friend of mine and his artwork who allowed me to kind of upload some of that stuff to train my particular style in Midjourney. And I feel like there's a lot of collaboration like that in the future that I think can be done. The writing perspective, it's really just like one of the biggest influences that AI has had is research. The book Astro Dawn and the story is inspired by a book that my dad had bought me called Temple of Man. And it's this extensive book on ancient Egypt on how the Temple of Luxor is like a representation of the human body. And it's a very dense book. So but now with AI, I have all of my connected research in Google Drive that I can query. My collaborator and I, we've been working on stories since we were kids, and we have all these notes that I've combined and thrown in a drive, and now I can access those notes at any time. And ideas in this book have come from things that I forgot about that we developed like 8 years ago, that have now found their way in this book. And that's because I'm able to research and hit those things quickly. So that's been the advent of using it from a creative perspective and the research perspective. Um, and as a writer, I don't probably use it the same way that like other writers, some writers or even non-writers are heavily leaning into AI. You know, you'll see advertisements like write a book a day or something like that with AI. And, you know, that's not going to be my thing, but more power to you if that's what you feel like you want to do. That's just it's not my place to insult you or comment in a negative way because that's how you're choosing to use it. And trust me when I tell you, if you are not a creative person, you will be weeded out. It's not going to help you be more creative. It's just a tool to enhance your creativity, is the way I think about it.
Yeah, that's great. I think this is where we'll probably have some messiness in this
Hmm.
conversation just because, it does evoke such strong reactions and um, this perspective of the tool, like technology being tools that are in our hands. Um, it's not a new issue.
Hmm.
It's always been a part of technological advancement. I think as we deal with this new technology and learn about how the tool works and how to work the tools, it's important to like stay engaged with it. And I think
Hmm.
sometimes the, black and white, yes, no perspective can uh, seed ground to people who
Hmm.
want to use the tools in certain ways. Like we've seen AI now being integrated into, military weapons and all of that.
Hmm.
So it will be shaped by how we use it, of course. And
Hmm.
um, I think, when we open the conversation up, I would love to hear from others who may have used these tools or interested in them. Or I know when we first talked, I was interested in kind of looking at the aspect of race as well in
Hmm.
using like Midjourney or these tools often have trouble like with black bodies like
Hmm.
depicting because of the people who created them and like where they come from. So I'm wondering your experience with that. Like, is that a hurdle? Do you see how how does like race intersect with these AI tools in the way you see it?
Yeah, I think
Big
it
one.
I think it was a hurdle, not as much now because I've been using the same tool, so it's been trained on my preferences. But I think that's still an issue. I think that if you keep prompts very general, they're always going to opt to white males more than anything else. So you have to be very specific in your prompt. But I also think that, as we talked about, like opting out completely presents its own danger. Like I get it, but like the reality is like these tools aren't going anywhere. So opting out, you lose your voice in the contribution. And I don't know how much our use contributes to it or not. But I do know if you refuse to use it at all, then you lose your voice and how it's shaped. Um, and as far as the race representation, that's why I will and am working, and my one of my best friends is constantly trying to push me to more open source tools because it allows you to train the model on your own, which I think is very important. I think that's kind of using open source is kind of the medium, like the happy balance. The problem with it is that you need a powerful machine to use it. And so like, that can become costly, but once you get one, then you can kind of opt out of using those tools that are draining the planet, closed source, training, the model on people who might not offer their consent and things like that. So it kind of gets you out of that gray area a little bit more. So that's definitely a direction I'm trying to move in. But yeah, if using tools like as is, you're definitely going to encounter some issues with race unless you're very specific, but they have gotten better when you specify. Um, so I think like with that in mind, it has grown and improved by quite a bit.
Yeah, so I think that links a bit to the last question I wanted to ask you, which is that, in a lot of well, I don't know if you would describe your work as Afrofuturist. I think
Mhm.
we might, I think it fits the general definition. And we did do a messy about Afrofuturism a few years back. So if anyone is interested, there's a conversation that goes in depth there. But within Afrofuturism, there's often like a really heavy emphasis on, of course, the future and technology and technological advancements, but there's also always a tie to the usually distant past or on ancestors and connections to African traditions. So I'm wondering, we have a visitor.
Yeah. She was whining, so this is
Uh,
Jasmine.
what's in her name?
Jasmine.
Jasmine. Welcome, Jasmine. I won't put you on the spot, Jasmine. So yeah, that connection to like the distant past or ancestors, African traditions.
Mhm.
I'm wondering your work make this connection as well, and how does like looking backwards and inform how you might envision the future?
Yeah, I mean it does significantly, and I mean it's hard to talk about this with like without spoiling like what's going to happen and things like that. But there's a lot of connective tissue to the past. I mean, I was raised by two very intelligent historians who taught me a lot about my history, so that's going to be embedded in the work, no matter what. So you'll see in future issues, for those who read it, that it it's deeply embedded in the work, and that past is important. That connection to the past is important and how it shapes the future. And it's hard to consider. Like I understand the term Afrofuturism. It's just not a term that I choose to use or like put myself in because I'm a futurism writer. Like Afrofuturism implies that it's separate, and I understand why it was made because again, we weren't included in those stories, and so it's kind of carving our own path. Um, but I don't, I again, Octavia Butler was very influential in that regard, as I just consider her a futurist. She is a master storyteller. It doesn't have to be put in the box of Afrofuturism. Um, but I respect the terminology. And I understand where it comes from. I just don't want to put myself in that box because I feel like I'm a storyteller. And naturally it's going to come from my perspective and the Black perspective because that's who I am and that's what I was shaped by. And so that's just going to be embedded in the story. There have been a lot of recent filmmakers that I feel like have really taken that step. Like Jordan Peele is a good example. Like obviously Get Out was a film that was thematically race was one of the main topics, but Us was not. And neither was what was the other one that he came out with?
Nope.
Nope,
Nope.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So those were horror stories and sci-fi stories with Black people in them. And like that's
Mm.
what I want to see. It's just like okay, now we're not tied to the racial discussion. This is just a story, and these are the characters. And
Mhm.
that's really important in a world where you put a person of color in anything that was initially connected to a white space, and now it's a woke piece, and it's ridiculous. So I want to get away from that separation, which is
Mhm.
why, like, hey, these are just good stories. We shouldn't be debating because the new X-Files is coming out, and now the two main characters are people of color, and now you have jokes about it's the woke files, and I'm like, come on, like,
Yeah,
race shouldn't be that. Race shouldn't be such a central theme in every story we're telling. If it
yeah,
doesn't add to the story, then it makes no difference what the character looks like. Now, if that's a central theme, then and those stories are still important. I don't want to get rid of those stories. I don't want to stop telling those stories. We just need more alternatives and stories to tell.
yeah, yeah. I see that totally. Like no one was calling, like ET, like white futurism or something. It was just like the generic. Oh, this is a story about aliens.
Mm,
And I think, yeah, it's interesting how Afrofuturism kind of became a real hot topic and popular term, and it was maybe I feel the early pioneers were kind of breaking out of boxes in order to
mhm.
create it, and then it became its own box. And people would say, "Oh, put that in the Afrofuturism box." Yeah.
Yeah.
So now there's that kind of resistance to that. And yeah, I definitely want to leave time, open it up. I see there is already some comments in the chat, and I will let's see. Rosa, do you have
Yeah,
anything? Yeah.
yeah. Ikaya is cannot share in person with her own voice this idea, but I'm gonna read it for you. Unable to speak, so can someone ask this for me? A lot of AI databases are actually hurting, poisoning Black neighborhoods in the South, places like Memphis, Tennessee, and near Shreveport, Louisiana. Do you think this will inspire authors such as yourself to write and create stories to make people more aware of the issue? And do you plan on collaborating with filmmakers in the future to make a few of your stories come alive in live action? And that was written with excitement marks. Live action, like how Tony Adeyemi is creating live action Children of Blood and Bone.
Yeah, great question, and absolutely. So let me start with the first one, and yes, you're absolutely right. Like AI and AI in particular and factory farming are two very damaging practices for poor and particularly Black communities in general. And I actually do address that to some capacity in the current book. As far as like the wastefulness, there are certain areas in the world that I'm building called archive cities. And what these areas are large e-waste zones where like old technology is being discarded and pushed aside, and then it's establishing like these kind of hybrid human and old technology communities. And so it gives an idea of it's really speaking to more than anything of how quickly things move and how often we just throw things away. There's a new cell phone coming out every week, which every year, excuse me, which means your old cell phone is going to a dump. And then that e-waste zone is collecting. Old technology is being discarded at alarming rates. A lot of this stuff is being dumped in poor communities, so that's something I actually do address in this actual work. And very interested in bringing more attention to that via storytelling, and also making sure that we acknowledge that. I can't use AI and not acknowledge that side of it, right? So like that's very important. And as far as like the live action, most definitely, I plan on working with traditional artists. I plan on working with eventually with animators to kind of bring it to life to a certain respect. So there's a lot of plans I have for this story. Some of it will be done with AI, some of it will be done with artists and filmmakers. And so it's really expansive. So yes, that's definitely in the cards. And happy to provide more information on that as it comes.
Manza, are
No.
you a gamer?
I am.
I could see, I'm learning about gaming. I don't know so much about it yet, but I understand that a lot of people use a storyline that like the ones you're talking about that claim a historical narrative or claim a
Mhm.
in the moment narrative and give certain messages about how to respond or
Yeah,
think forward. So I'm curious if you have any plans for making this a game. Yeah.
I actually do. So I have plans with that as well. So it would be more of what they call like a like interactive visual novel where you'll have choices that's based on the work or at least a subsect of the work. And then your choices like influence how the story goes. That's like my initial idea, but I have other ideas for things I want to do gaming wise, like side stories and things like that. I play like a lot of strategy games or what they call like turn-based games, and kind of using Divine Masquerade as like the linchpin for some of those games. So yeah, that it's definitely in the cards.
Very cool. Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll bring a hard-hitting question.
Okay.
Being the child of two brilliant historians, what would you say this set of projects reflects about who you are individually?
Yeah, so I mean, so one of the things I can say for sure is that the phrase "it takes a village" has never been more truer than my upbringing. Um, obviously my mom and dad, but my brothers, cousins, aunts, uncles, like we have a very large family. And I'm very close with my mom's and dad's side, and my mom and dad's sides like are also very close. So I grew up thinking that all families were like this, and had the rude awakening that they aren't when I got out into the real world. But with that realization, it actually I realized how privileged I was because not everyone gets that opportunity. You know, not everyone has a mom and dad who found a school where you have your various people in the community, including family, teaching out at that school where everyone is looking out for you. Um, and I think that collective upbringing helped shape me in ways that like I didn't even realize until later. I was what mom kindergarten, preschool when at my mom's school. But looking back on old videos, I mean, she had us doing plays and martial arts and so many different types of things. And then when I went on to private school, those things weren't foreign to me. And I'm in a computer lab early. I'm learning about technology early. So there were so many privileges that I was given. Um, and a lot of that came from my family upbringing and having more people than my parents influence me. But starting off with my mom and dad. So like I think it greatly shapes who I am today.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, yes. Hi. Would you like to share your
Hey, hi
question?
everybody. Hey, Mansa.
Hey, Jacqueline.
You know what? This is really hard because I have so many questions, but all of your discussion with Asa has been so eloquent that you have just about answered anything that I could have asked for any of my friends that write speculative fiction and fiction in general. I just wanted to say that I do appreciate you being here today. I very much appreciate the effort that you've put into this book because we really do need these stories told. I completely understand how you say your parents influence you so much and you had, access to all of this information as my mom was a writer too. And she also, you had two classrooms, one at home and one at school.
Yes.
And you thought everybody was getting one at home. And then you go to school and you have these discussions, or at least in my case, trying to explain the oppression of women because I had read The
Mhm.
Good Earth because my mom told me it was okay. And then my fourth grade teacher said, no, 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 that's not supposed to be for the classes. So the fact that you can overlay the stories and the people within the book the first time I saw it, and I was like, that sure as heck looks like Dr. Gill's on the page. So, and your father's very handsome as well as yourself. But um, I just found so many overlays of stories, and you explained that you've been writing this with someone else, with your friend, for a
Mhm.
long time. I mean, my husband and I literally sat down and had the conversation of mind melding and how it was utilized
Mhm.
in the military,
Yeah.
as he's a former Marine. I compared it to men stare at goats when I
Mhm.
was reading it. And then my husband and I, because he was military, so he has more privilege to that information. He was going through all of these things that took place in the process. And so first I was wondering, okay, where are you pulling some of the information, which you explained, but some of this is very specific. That's a very specific idea.
Hmm.
And how much research did you have to do in order to bring that to light? What are your, not to reveal your sources, but how are you pulling together not just we know where you got the blackness from and
Hmm.
we know where you get the science from, but some of those things are far beyond that, and it takes so much more effort. And that was one of my questions. And then in regards to the AI, if you find yourself being one of those people that uh, is going to be also an advocate for it, because now I have to send these to my daughter because I'm trying to get her to not fight with AI. And she's in social media marketing. And
Yeah.
so we just had this discussion. So I have copied the pages and sent them to her. So those are my
Yeah.
two questions.
No, and thank you, Jacqueline. That means a lot. And so I can tackle the research one first. So from a number of sources, and from a number of books, like so some of the stuff you were talking about, and with your husband being in the military, I was reading this book, which I think Stranger Things was inspired by as well, was the Montauk Project, the like the Manhattan Project, and all these different like kind of sci-fi conspiracy theory type, but some of it's true, and so it's a amalgamation of all that different stuff that like dream technology and dream experiments and remote viewing experiments and things like that. That's all embedded in this work and doing like different research and reading different books around those times. So I'm trying to incorporate as much of that as I can, but then adapting it to an in-universe philosophy that feels different. And so, like, the technology may be similar, but it's going to be rendered differently in this story. So that's kind of where a lot of that inspiration comes from. And then also from like astrology and I got a lot of inspiration, especially for like the Astro Dawn book that's in the story from the spiritualist movement in the 18th century and things like that. So all that stuff is kind of embedded in. And as far as like and yes, I'm definitely, my website, which we can share at the end, is definitely like a call to action for to incorporate with AI, but it's calling for collaboration. It's like I do not want it to be, I'm no advocate of human replacement, and I just think we have to look at technology in its history. Now, obviously AI is at the pinnacle of human achievement, so I get it. It can be very scary in that regard. Um, but this is how technology works, and it hasn't replaced people since. When you look at hip hop music, there was a lot of negativity around sampling and sampling other people's instruments and things like that, and it was very frowned upon. But now hip hop is a respected genre, obviously. But when you also hear hip hop music played with live instruments, it creates a completely different sound. Those musicians haven't gone anywhere. I saw someone compare it to how painters might have felt about photography when that hit the scene. Imagine you spend months doing a painting and now someone can set up a machine and just take a picture. How painters must have felt at that time, but there are still painters. They didn't go anywhere. So I think it's just kind of understanding how this technology works. Finding ways to collaborate. I think that when I see people who are very creative using AI, you can see it clear as day. There are a lot of artists that I see on like Instagram and things like that making these little trailers, and I know I'm like, okay, this person is a cinematographer because you can't prompt AI to do this without having the basic understanding of how cinematography works. Whereas you can see someone who doesn't know it and their video looks completely different because they don't know the medium, they don't know the form. So as I'm creating these graphic novels, I register for the master class by Neil Gaiman on comic book storytelling. I have a graphic novel book about paneling, so I'm learning the process and the medium. I'm just using AI as a tool, and so it's important for me to kind of understand how that stuff works if I'm going to be in that space and not just relying so heavily on AI to do it. Um, even the paneling in my book, look, I'm doing all that. Like I'm not using AI to rely on it or to like suggest even where I should fit the paneling. It's based on my story and how I feel like and that comes from reading other graphic novels and learning. So, um, that's how I would advocate kind of using it as a tool. And and to the younger people, to your daughter, like they're fighting against it, and I get it. Like I might have been at their age, to be honest. But I think that over time, you know, as it encroaches into every kind of area of our society, they're going to get used to it. And I think it's just better to kind of learn it and understand it now. Um, than, as Asa mentioned, being so black and white about it. Like you don't have to dive all the way in, but you should know a little bit about it. You should know how you can incorporate in your workspace, whether creatively or with work. Um, but to completely opt out of its use, I think is a mistake. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
I mean, I was trying to uh she's 30 and she's trying to get her company to understand the use of both, and they're not
Mhm.
getting it. And something like
Mhm.
to use it as a tool, like you said. And I
Mhm.
think it's harder to for a generation that's even older than her, because she's been doing this for 10, 12 years,
Mhm.
to get that generation that's a little bit older to her to understand that this is okay. Like you said, it's
Mhm.
not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So thank you. I will utilize sending the site to her so that she can start that conversation in a corporate meeting so that
Mhm.
they can understand it a little bit better. Uh,
And as a marketer, as someone who's skilled in that area,
mhm.
AI is good as your skill set in that area. Meaning, if you are used to content marketing or in her respect, marketing in general, you're going to be able to create some amazing workflows and systems using AI that a person who's not familiar wouldn't be able to. And so it's a better way to kind of duplicate your efforts. It makes you more efficient. It's not replacing you, it's just a way to enhance your talents. But if I don't know anything about marketing, then I'm going to have like very generic social media campaigns and marketing campaigns and things like that because I don't know the logistics and the psychology of it. But someone who knows it, you know, that can be very useful using AI to kind of implement those systems because you know how to train because you have an understanding of it. So that's the best way I can look at it.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Of course.
continued success. This is awesome. So
No, thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.
I have a naughty question. Would you, using your wonderful speculative mind, could you think of uh, how would it look like to give up entirely AI? Just speculating, not because we are
Hmm.
just speculate. Imagine like a remove it.
Hmm.
How would your work and your line of work and the plans, well, not the plans, but more like the creativity that you are putting there would look like?
It would look it would look mostly the same actually, just instead of AI, I would be working with a traditional artist as the collaborator. Um, so I don't think the workflow would change as much. What I do think is that when I do eventually work with a traditional artist, I want to give them a lot more freedom to like interpret my story in their own way artistically that I can't give to the AI because I have to provide my own influence to it. So I think the difference would be and again I do plan on creating like once a volume is finished, then I want to work with a traditional artist to create a special edition of that volume, and it's going to be based on their own interpretation. And I'm actually looking forward to it because in that respect, I can be a little more hands off. Is like I can, I can pass over the original work as a more of a proof of concept for that artist, but I really want that artist to have their own influence over how they interpret the work and how it feels visually to them. The same way, when you read a book, and you have your own idea of what the character looks like, and then you watch the movie and it either, it looks kind of like the character like you thought of it or it doesn't. And so um I think in that regard, I would work with a traditional artist a lot different because I would be relying on their input a lot more. Whereas working with AI as a collaborator, you're you're definitely working by yourself and you're influencing and programming the AI based on your thoughts, where another human is going to have different interpretations, and I actually welcome that. So I think that would be the difference.
Hmm. Thank you, Mansa. Thank you so much for
No, thanks, Rosa.
indulging my stubborn question.
No, no worries.
We have a question from Area.
Asa,
Ryan.
you enjoyed that comparison of hip hop and sampling. Why do you find it so interesting?
Well, I did see we have a hand up too from
Oh, sorry, I
Ryan, so
didn't
we'll
see the
get to
hand up.
that.
I don't know,
Yeah, if
I'm
we have time,
blind.
I'll
Oh, yes,
explain
sorry,
more. But
Ryan, I'm sorry for overlooking you. I'm so sorry.
Not a problem. Don't worry about it. My question kind of is a follow-up to yours, actually. I admittedly am probably also more on the side of using less AI and seeing kind of the harm it has caused, but I also fully believe that it's kind of one of those, it's not going anywhere. It's not about to stop anytime soon, and knowing it is far better than ignoring it. I'm curious if you have like an idea or maybe even seen an example of like what it could look like to kind of try to hold space for both the aspects of how harm, like the harm that AI is causing, and maybe like pushing for like a better way, like better usage, better ways of it, better like ways for artists to maybe opt their art out if they want to, if that's just not their thing, while also having the idea that moving forward it is here, and so we are going to have to work with it rather than against it for like I guess the betterment of it overall. Yeah.
No, Ryan, that's a great question. And I think about that a lot actually, because I think that's something that we're going to definitely have to reconcile with. If I had to answer that today, it really would be like the push towards more open source tools, over the closed source tools, over the big companies like ChatGPT, like Claude. And again, like I use all these as of now, but one of my closest friends is completely in the transition to open source tooling. And he's invested a lot of like money in doing so, like because he really and I feel like ultimately that's the way to go, especially if you're an artist, because what he's doing is he's training the models on his own artwork. So it's all sourced on his own stuff. And if he's training any model outside of his own artwork, it's like more open source material that's already out in the ether and not kind of just taking from someone's work without consent. What I will say is that for the closed source tooling, there needs to be opt-in consent from artists if it's going to train the model. I think these companies need to be a lot more transparent about that. There's a reason why you're seeing these lawsuits of people who feel like they've had their work stolen or didn't agree to have the model trained on their work. And so I think those conversations are important. But yeah, the most immediate action someone can take if they want to use AI is moving towards the open source route, because I think that solves the issue of power consumption. Because you're using your own power, that solves the issue of taking from other people's work without their consent because you're training your own model. And so I think that at least right now is probably the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, these data centers are going to keep popping up. Um, we have to figure out a way to address that issue and figuring out like this high level of power consumption and where these data centers are being built. So that's something that we all have to figure out as a society how we want to tackle that. And also the large displacement of jobs is another huge concern. I think on a positive note, it is ushering in a new level of entrepreneurship that I think we haven't seen in a very long time, because a lot of people are encouraged to go out on their own and build with AI and start their own businesses. But then we're also seeing massive layoffs. These large organizations, thousands of people and then, being very cavalier about replacing those people with AI. And that's a problem. So I think that needs to be addressed as well.
Asa, Chad has his hand.
Yeah, Chad, please hop in. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just curious. I guess more of a specific question about when working with like commercial AI chatbots, like they're trying to like generate longer and longer conversations, and they're usually quite sycophantic about how they do that. So I
Yeah.
was curious, as like a creative, like how do you maintain some sort of objective criticism of your own work when you're like using AI chatbots to help kind of generate and create ideas and that sort of thing?
I'm glad you asked that question because it it was very annoying. So what I had to do was I actually had to literally add custom instructions to not be sycophantic, to be honest with you, and give harsh criticism of my work. And so what happens is initially you would have to keep putting that in the chat. Now you can customize your chat and how it responds to you. And so I'm very meticulous about when I pose an idea, like don't tell me it's a good idea, just to like really think through why this wouldn't be good. And I've been and with doing that, I actually have been talked out of a couple things. So one thing, so to give an example, and again, like I'll try not to spoil, but there's a there's a reveal in the second book that comes super early. But when I originally wrote the book, that plan was to reveal it at the very end to give kind of like a Twilight Zone type of twist. But I was struggling with that because I'm just like, well, do I want to have this entire story be about like this major reveal at the end? And before I put in the custom instructions, it was telling me both ideas were great. Hey, Monster, this one is good because, and it was just going back. So then when I added the custom instructions, I was eventually convinced. I'm like, you know what, I'm going to reveal it early, and it ultimately came to that conclusion because I didn't want the story to be about that reveal. The story is bigger than that. So I decided to reveal it early, and then now I can cover other characters and things like that um a lot earlier in the content. And so I think that's a really good way to work with it. But default, yeah, it's definitely gonna massage your ego a little bit, and so you have to be specific and telling it not to.
It looks like we just have time for you to share, Mansa, where your new fans can find you. I'll put your social media links here in the chat, but if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, yeah. So etherversity.ai is my website. And you can find the Divine Masquerade story there. You can download free previews of the graphic novel. And then the links to Amazon and books.buy, which is a print on demand platform, are both available there. My Instagram is etherversity. And then my TikTok is also Etherversity as well. So you can follow on those. Also have an Etherversity page on Facebook that I can share as well. Um, and then there's some other platforms that I'll be publishing to soon also. One called Global Comics, which is actually surprisingly like one of the few comic publications that's AI friendly. And the good thing about that also is that they give you an option as a reader to select if you don't want any AI content. And I'm totally fine with that. So like those are, I think transparency is the most important in that regard. So, but yeah, those are where you can find the work. And yeah, and if you're interested and don't want to commit all the way, the previews give you like of both chapters give you like quite a bit. So you can download those directly from the website.
Thank you, Mansa. I think, there are some folks that may have to leave right now. We have a few more minutes to chat amongst ourselves, but I want to thank you for bringing this conversation to Messy Conversations, in part because I think the university also, like all the other schools, are grappling with how to use AI and when and what's allowed and all the rules around it. And I have been so intrigued listening to students talk about the different ways they're using it to enhance their creativity, like you mentioned, and to get them started with projects that they've not had a way forward on. And I don't think it's untrue for faculty too, if we're all being honest. And I think this fits great with our conversation for next week. If you can all join, it's focused on inclusive excellence in student affairs. To me, that is about inclusion, how we use technology to make things more seen. And the Black narratives absolutely need to be seen, and the history needs to be seen. And I just so appreciate you taking the time today.
Oh,
No, thank you.
let
Thank you for
me
the privilege.
let me add quickly. Mark Howard, who's a big fan of the Divine Masquerade, wants to know when the third book will be out, episode.
Yeah, the third chapter episode is in the works currently. I'm currently 10 pages in. So I wanted to try to get it out sooner, but this stuff actually takes a lot a lot of time, even with AI. So probably late May, early June. I might aim for around your birthday, Ma. So we'll see.
That would be nice. Very interesting.
Well, thank you so much, Mansa. It was great getting to know you, and I'm really glad we got to have this conversation. And don't forget about us when you're, accepting your Oscar. And shout out to when you
Never
got
know.
your
Thank you for having me. This was an incredible conversation and the engagement was great. Appreciate the questions. So it's an honor. Thank you so much.
Come back after the third episode and share with us. We get exclusive rights.
Anytime. Anytime.